What's up, Story Geeks? It's Daryl.
And Jay.
On today's show, we are going to dig deeper into Get Out. Third episode in our Scary Movie Month series.
And it's going to be an awesome show. Joining us on today's podcast, Megan Salinas from Silver Screams and Afterbuzz TV, who's been on the show before, so you guys know her. And also Michael Young, who's been on the show a bunch of different times. We always get great comments with Michael. You can always check him out at NERDSoul.
And we would also love to hear your thoughts on Get Out. So you can share those with us in the Story Geeks Facebook group. The link to the group is in the show notes.
Also, you don't want to miss our upcoming shows, but you also don't want to miss the shows that we've already done. We've had some awesome shows already this Scary Movie Month, starting with A Quiet Place with Markia McCarty, which was amazing. And then The Meg with Allie Plum. So make sure you hit the subscribe button because we've got more in Scary Movie Month to deliver to you.
That's right. So thanks for listening, you guys. As always, the Story Geeks podcast is produced by the Reclamation Society. And let's dig into Get Out. Okay, so we are going to jump into Get Out. First of all, ladies first, we have Megan Salinas returning to the show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah, remind everybody what you're up to and where they can find you and all that stuff.
I'm a host at Afterbuzz TV. I do a lot of stuff there. I also host a Lost retrospective podcast called No Love Lost. And again, if horror is more of your thing, my YouTube channel Silver Screams, where check it out. My co-host and I react to horror things, and we discuss them with vlogs, and there's a series called Horror Q&A where I watch a horror movie and she asks me questions about it because she refuses to watch it. It's a good time.
I like that.
Which is exactly why when we dreamt up Scary Movie Month, we were like, well, we have to ask Megan. And then our other guest, we've got our buddy Michael Young over here. Welcome back to the show.
How many times? What is your number now?
Do we owe you a jacket?
3 or 4?
And it's more than
I
that.
think it might be 5. Phantom Menace. That was technically a 2-parter.
Yeah.
So,
Justice League, Black Panther.
Black Panther.
Story Geek Awards.
I guess
This is
the
5,
important question here is, did you keep the punch card for your free coffee at the end of it?
Yeah.
Man.
Oh, he gets a
I think it's in
jacket.
the
He gets
car.
the 5 Timers jacket.
Exactly. It's still in the mail. It'll be in the mail for years.
It'll be in the mail for a while.
Yeah.
You can find me NERDSoul, NERDSoul, at that NERDSoul on all channels, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook.
He interviewed me, and he doesn't tell me what it is. I don't know what it is. And I'm like, hey, what do we need prep for? He's like, no, prep. I'm like, what do you mean no prep? I show up, he's like, you decide the topic, whatever you want to talk about for however long. I'm like, okay. So you can go see that. By the time this comes out, you'll be able to see that on your YouTube channel.
We actually tell like 3 or 4 funny stories in that. So yeah.
There you go.
Well, guys, thanks for being with us yet again. It's going to be fun to dive into this one with our pals. So let's do it. So this is Scary Movie Month, and all of these movies are theoretically scary. I don't know if we could say that about The Meg, but that's a different podcast. You can go back and listen to that one.
Last week's podcast.
So we start off with this question. What makes Get Out scary?
That's an interesting one. I do want to say, I just like right off the bat, Jordan Peele has an excellent sense of suspense and pacing. You can tell I know this is his directorial debut, but if you're familiar with his comedy in any regard, you know that he's a big fan of the genre. And it's hard to sort of quantify, but like just watching this movie, you can tell it's crafted with a lot of love for movies like Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives, and I know a lot of people have already made the comparison to The Twilight Zone. Like, it is right at home alongside any one of those. So it's sort of hard to define. But I think for what really makes it scary is just the core concept behind it. You know, the fact that there are people who are smiling at you, who you can tell right from the get-go they don't mean good things for you. They intend you harm, but they're smiling at you the whole time. It's sort of breaking down that facade of what's supposed to be inviting. And there are a lot of thematic things in particular where we'll touch on it. But I remember watching a YouTube think piece on it about like the fear of unwanted attention is sort of like a big crux of the movie.
That's good. That's really good. So, one of the things I think that is amazing about this film is the way that he treats the escalation of fear. And what I mean by that is a lot of movies just jump right into their core premise of like, this is terrifying. But what he does is he like works these fears in one at a time. Like the first fear he introduces is meeting your lover's family.
Yeah.
Right? And it's our
And
need
it's something
for
universal.
acceptance. It's a universal. Like everybody knows what that is. The second one is navigating cultural differences. Because now he's met them, and it's a very different culture, and now we're like butting up against one another and trying to explore that, right? But those things also play off our need for acceptance, our need for community, the threat that intimacy represents. Then he ups the ante again, and now it's dealing with centuries of racism and its lingering impact. The cautiousness with which we approach one another about even the subject matter there. And then finally, he just hits us over the head with
Literally.
the spiritual or at least deeply held beliefs that become a driving force for love or hate in the world. And like it just escalates on top of one another. It's like the crafting of that. The first time I watched this film, it had been after the hype train, and so I'm like, yeah, it was good. And I watched it this time, and I was like paying attention to every little thing. I'm like, this is a masterpiece, dude. Like the way that he crafts each one of these things.
When you watch it the second time, you're like, oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why he wrote this part and this part.
Exactly.
And then you watch it again
solid.
with commentary, and you're like, holy
Oh, see, I've never
crap.
watched it with commentary.
I was lucky enough a little while ago to see a screening of it where they did a Q&A with Jordan Peele afterwards. And that was super
okay.
cool. But yeah, just the use of foreshadowing in the movie, and it's so freaking clever. You're like, this is not fair. You're a first-time director. How are you this good?
Yeah, exactly.
If you watch the commentary, he talks about all that stuff throughout it, and he's spouting out all of this brilliance, but he's saying it as if he's like talking about what he saw on TV last night. He's like, so we were thinking about this, and and it's like, whatever, dude.
So
Yeah.
blasé
Yeah.
about his own brilliance.
You're awesome. Come on, man.
Man, what makes this movie so scary is that it's real.
Yeah.
And this happens, and the villains are real people. See, sometimes you can disassociate, like, say, Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers, Pumpkinhead, the Meg,
You're like
Leprechaun.
when you shoot a bazooka at Michael Myers and he's still standing, your suspension of disbelief kind of goes out the window, and you're like, okay, we're just here for some goofy fun times.
Yeah. But when you have a movie that, and I know people have joked about it, especially in the black community, where it's like, oh, there's a new documentary coming out called But everyone that saw, at least everyone on black Twitter that saw that was like, oh, this movie's going to be good. Like, we already knew. It was like, oh, this movie's going to be good.
Yeah.
Because this movie happens. Like, this is now, of course, Hollywood ratchets things up. But it's real. It happens at the grocery store. It happens at the mall. Or it happens at school and class, at work. So people have been in these situations where it's like, okay, there's this work event. I'm the only black guy at my job. If I don't go, then it's going to be like, they're going to notice that I didn't go.
Yeah.
But then if I go, it's kind of like all eyes on you.
Right.
So it's very weird. And, knowing that fear, he's kind of already, at least for a lot of the black fan base, and then some of the people of color fan base as well, they're already bought in because it's like, oh, I've lived this. That's what makes it so scary, because you're like, yeah, these people are, delivering your packages, or these people are at the bank, or these people exist. I mean, outside of probably the head cutting and the swapping.
Dude,
but I mean, we don't know.
Somewhere too.
We don't know.
I think that's the crux of it, is that there's a level of authenticity to so much of this movie that it really resonates with a lot of people in that regard.
I don't really have a whole lot to add. I mean, you guys have already said everything that I would say. I will say one very specific thing, and I'll call out one scene, which is the scene where the grandfather runs directly at Chris and then veers off at the last second.
Yeah.
That's one of my weird little tiny nightmares. Like,
someone running at
I'll,
you.
I'll be out on the street and see somebody that looks kind of creepy to me, And in my head, I'm like, what if they just turn and start running at me? You know?
You're planning scenarios.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
And I
You
even
gotta clothesline them,
Yeah.
man. You gotta
And in
move out of the way
college-
at the last second.
I took a screenwriting class in college,
Uh-huh.
which I don't remember any of it, but but I wrote a script, like a short film, and I wrote that into my film. Like a dude just turns and runs at the protagonist.
Oh,
And
it's terrifying.
so when I saw that, I was like, okay.
Yeah. That's scary.
That scares me.
Jordan
That's
Peele,
scary.
how did you peer into my nightmares?
Okay, so one of the most artful things in this movie is the way that the storytellers deal with conversations about race. So here are some examples of that. We'll just kind of do a quick fire through these. I want to see what you guys think about these. The question is, why is it important for these things to occur in the film? That's what we're getting at. What about these racially charged statements brings meaning to the story? There's so much in this movie that doing a quick fire is kind of hard, but we'll do the best we can. The first one is when Chris asks Rose if her parents know that he's black.
That's a very important part because when you're someone who's black and you're dating someone who's white, you already know that there's history in this country between these two ethnicities or races or whatever. So you're like, I don't want to surprise your family. We're not too far removed from I can't vote. Or if a white man is walking down the sidewalk, I have to get off the sidewalk. We're not that far from it. Like my mother was integrated into school in high school. In high school.
Crazy.
So we're not that far. That's why I think it's very important. It already shows that his back hairs are already coming up.
Yeah.
They're already starting. They're not even there yet, and he's already like, I don't want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question for him to ask because you don't, and from the audience point of view too, we know something's amiss because we know we're going into a horror movie. But the first time you're watching it, you're like, is this a guess who's coming to dinner scenario where like they're going to be completely off guard and you really don't know what to expect. And as somebody who's just generally introverted, he wants to avoid as much of that discomfort as humanly possible. But he knows nothing about them. Like, yeah, sure, his girlfriend Rose seems really cool, that monster. But yeah, he has no idea what to expect from the rest of her family. So I feel like it's a fair question for him to ask and a sadly necessary one even in 2018.
It's also a really good example of what I was talking about earlier where he just he does this little tiny thing where like with every line of dialogue, the stakes become higher. And like you weren't expecting the stakes to become higher. You thought the stakes were just going to be the stakes. But every line of dialogue is like, because we're going to go through some more of these, and it's like, oh my gosh, just turn it up,
a little bit,
just turn it up, just
little
turn it
bit.
up, just turn it up. Like it's
just
crazy.
ratchets up the tension.
Yeah.
Yeah, because right here, that should be a red flag for the audience of like, oh, how long have they been dating? Oh, like she hasn't mentioned this to their parents, to her parents in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Is that her being cool, or is that her not being cool? We don't know.
Yep.
Well, it's certainly her being on his side, which I think is why it's important. Like, she establishes herself as a safe place for him, no matter what he's walking into.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Let me read them all off to you,
Perfect.
and then we'll go through, and you guys can just hit on the ones that you think you want to talk about. So we have when Rose tells Chris that her dad would have voted for Obama a third time if he could have.
And then he says it.
I couldn't because that's just continue. If I could roll my eyes, take them out, roll them down the street, like roll them down a mountain, just keep rolling.
We have when Rod tells Chris not to go to a white girl's parents' house.
Sound advice, but continue.
We have when Dean Armitage, Rose's dad, he says it's such a privilege to experience other people's cultures, and he also asks Chris what his sport is, and he actually says a lot. One of the more subtle ones, though, is when he says, turns out people appear just as messed up as they are in the city. And then we've got when Rose's brother brings up about Chris's genetics. What stands out at you guys? What do you want to talk about the Obama thing?
It's clear that Rose is beautiful. She is absolutely gorgeous, because I don't know about you guys, but like maybe it's just knowing that they're in a movie, but like I feel like I would have turned around at some point, like probably around the genetics conversation. I would have been like, okay, well, this has been fun. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The brothers. Oh my gosh. It's one of the creepiest characters I've ever
But
seen.
he's also anxious. Like he wants to get. You can tell he likes the visceral part.
Yeah.
Of this, the knocking them out and dragging
Yeah.
them. He's like, I want to fight, and if I can put you in a headlock and stuff, and they're like, no,
Like, yeah,
we're gonna hypnotize
he's
him.
clearly overcompensating for his own perceived, I guess, weakness.
Yeah.
And so he overcompensates through violence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to the statement of anyone who's watching, the problem with the statement about voting for Obama a third time if you could is you're not saying it because you're like, hey, I really like President Obama and he did some good stuff. You're saying it as a way to superficially identify with me because I'm black. And that's the problem with it. And that's the problem with liberal and what I think Brandon Easton calls well-meaning whites. And what he means by that are these like, we're liberal. And it's like, no, you're just as racist as someone on the right. You just hide it behind yoga. But it's like it's
yoga and kale.
It's like yoga and kale, but still racist. It's like, okay, I care about Black Lives Matter. It's great. All right, can I come over and eat dinner tonight? Oh well, it's just our house isn't, and then you get that kind of thing. Once you start to peel that stuff back, you find out that it's not that you're really so progressive. It's that no, I am racist, but I'm not as racist as these other people. That's the statement that really killed me because she said it as a way to be like, oh, my dad's cool. And it's like, no, your dad's not cool. And then when he says it, it's like, yeah, he's definitely not cool.
Yeah.
And then it's like, it makes you look at the whole family differently. Even first time watching it, it had me wondering like, okay, so maybe Rose is cool and her family puts her up to this?
So when I was watching the movie for the first time, I was totally expecting something very Stepford Wives-ish to have happened to her family, or that they had somehow done this unbeknownst to her, for sure. Mm-hmm. It's up until that closet door scene, man.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, kudos to the actress because she is freaking phenomenal.
I'm just going to piggyback off what you guys have already said because it's brilliant. But this is the modern experience. Like, this is a daily occurrence, right? It's just, I've been in these scenarios, and I'm not going to pretend that I haven't been the one who said something real stupid either, right? Just because we're human beings. We say things that are
we all
super
make
dumb.
Mistakes.
Yeah. But I've been in conversations where I'm like, oh my gosh, why are you saying that? Like, that is not the thing to say. I wish that it wasn't that way, but the way he captures it in this film is remarkable. And at this point too, I think like we've got this nation. And I don't know how other nations are. I haven't dealt with this situation in other nations, but we're all, when we exit our houses, we're all walking into this minefield of possibilities, right? Yeah. Where you could step on a minefield at any time. And it's really, really fascinating to me the way that they handle it. And it's just really good. I think that there's these, it's so accurate to our experiences, and you can just see that there are multiple meanings and our interpretations under each layer. So one of the things that I thought was really amazing, because I was watching the film, and a lot of it's like, voted for Obama a third time. It's like, well, that's a little bit more obvious.
Yeah, but it's kind of one of those things where I guess you're kind of like, okay, this is weird, and he's kind of like the corny guy, and I guess I expected this. Right. I can just make it through the weekend. Right. Kind of one of those things.
Right, exactly. My favorite line of all was when he says, and this is a really fascinating one to me, and it's such good writing, because I hear this kind of thing all the time. When Dean turns to Chris and says, it turns out people up here are just as messed up as they are in the city. and you're like, you just said the people in the. Why would you assume the people in the city are messed up?
Yeah.
Why would you assume that?
That's almost probably like a throwaway thought that
Right.
he thinks isn't bad.
Exactly.
But you're essentially saying, by virtue of living in the city, that you're messed up.
Exactly.
And that's the problem.
Exactly.
And then, of course, by virtue of the city, you're really meaning urban, and by urban, you're really meaning black.
That's it.
So what you're really saying, you're like, we need to capture the urban demo. Oh, so you want black kids to make it cool, so then you can sell it to? Oh, okay, I understand. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of that thing where, but even myself, because Lisa, she's been on the show, my wife,
yeah.
me and her talk like, would you leave? Would you get out of there? Would you, get out?
Right.
And I'm like, honestly, it's one of those statements where it's like, you know what? It's 2 days. I've dealt with racism before.
Right.
It's 2 days. I'll be home.
Right.
And it's kind of one of those things. But then it gets
Which is really his
more
attitude.
and
You can see the
more.
whole time.
Yeah.
He's just
and-
like,
but
no,
then it's
okay,
like it's
okay.
more
Yeah.
and more and more, and it's just like, oh no.
And to be fair, there's no way for him to have predicted what their actual plan was.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because you get there and
Yeah.
it's just like, okay, they're kind of like the regular run-of-the-mill stuff that you get at work or in school or something. So I can take this for 2 days.
Right.
It's 2 days. We'll be back Sunday night or whenever they were planning on going back. I can take it.
Right.
I think this stuff is part of what makes it so universal too, because like the Obama thing and the genetics and stuff like that, and talking about how fast black people can run and things like that. Like
Yeah.
it's very over the top. And I remember watching it the first time. I'm thinking like, well, would this have been scarier if he was a little more subtle with it? But it's the over the top stuff that helps those of us that don't suffer from racism identify with it. You know what I mean?
because
Like,
the-
it's like, well, okay, even if I can't identify because I'm white, this is still super uncomfortable, and I
Yeah,
can
it's like-
identify with that.
It's like, why
you
is
know?
he saying this? Why is he going out of the way to
Yeah.
say this stuff?
Yeah.
I'm sort of from a very personal perspective. I'm in a very weird position when it comes to like looking at this movie, because I come from a family where my dad is Mexican. He's full-blooded Mexican, although second generation, and my mom is white. So I'm 50% Mexican and 50% white. And so there are a lot of, and I wasn't raised speaking Spanish. Like, I can barely speak it. It's embarrassing. But there are lots of situations where I'm too Mexican to be white and too white to be Mexican. So like I've kind of been on both sides of this scenario of being like, I'm too white to be with everybody else in this party setting, and then vice versa. Like I'll look over at I distinctly remember there was one day I was hanging out with a group of friends, and literally all of them were white and blonde except for me, and I was just like, one of these things is not like the other. So I felt for Chris in this scenario, but also there's like this understanding of like, well, this family's trying. It's a different type of racism, but they're well-meaning, maybe.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely a level of the discomfort for Chris that I definitely identified with, even though I'm not African American. But like, it speaks to the complexity of racial issues in this country. Because it's something that we like all have to deal with, but at varying degrees. I have another friend who is full-blooded Mexican who also gets treated like she's too white in certain situations just because she speaks English and got good grades. So it's a very complex issue. It doesn't necessarily matter what racial background you're from. There's always something to navigate.
Right.
I definitely don't want to call this person out or anything like that, but I definitely had a friend in college who said she said something offensive and was in trouble for it, and she's like, I'm not racist. You're one of my best friends. And I was just like,
It's like, okay. That's racist. It's not as racist, but let me tell you why. when you use a friend of yours as a shield from critique, of a racist thing that you said about a group, that's racist.
Yeah.
Because you're not then using the friend as someone who you identify with, love, and care for. That friend is literally a shield or a facade that you have to pull out when necessary to be like, look,
Yeah.
look.
And the thing about it
Look
is,
at
like,
Megan.
I can't
people.
possibly be racist.
I love Mexican people.
It's like Donald Trump taking a picture like with a taco bowl at Trump Tower, going like, "I love Hispanics."
I feel like
man.
I feel like we all need to just wear around like racist odometers.
Oh, yeah.
You can be like, oh, that just went above.
Like, it's like you, like
Walk
you don't
around
even
that
control
guy.
it. It moves
It just
itself.
moves.
Like
It
somebody
moves.
says something, it's like
Yeah.
it's getting into the red right now.
It's getting into the red. Oh, it's
See,
funny.
I can't do that because there are people who I love dearly where it would be going off all the time, and I'm like, oh, you're a good person. You just have a lot of antiquated.
Yeah. Well,
ideals.
I think a great statement comes from, there was this older lady that was interviewed during Brexit. She was in the UK.
Oh, okay.
And she said straight to the camera, I don't like black people and I don't know why. If we could get more people to get there, just to get there, because America doesn't even want to admit that racism is real. So if we could get to
We know
there,
it's wrong,
then
so we're like, I can't be racist because
so it's like-
only evil people are racist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, and of course it has to do with how America and Hollywood has sold racism. Racism is, you're burning crosses and like, that's it. It's like, no, racism has levels. I got this last week. When you walk by, you're in the parking lot and you're walking somewhere and somebody hits the lock on you again, like in the car, they hits the lock again. It's like, yeah, that's racist. And the idea is like
Like in Office
racism,
Space.
and like racism is even illogical in the idea like, okay, so I brought my car. I'm gonna park my car. It's still your car. What am I gonna do with my car? Am I just gonna leave, or I'm gonna circle back and get mine? Or
Yeah.
What am I gonna do with my car?
I'm not gonna steal your Geostorm, brother.
Or like I've seen ladies like kind of slide to the side in the elevator, stuff like that. So like small stuff.
Yeah.
is still-
Microaggressions.
Yeah, like very small things where it's and I mean a lot of people that are either watching or listening, it's more of a thing that you can feel. It's like you can feel it, like kind of like the Obama thing. Like just saying the Obama, like, I don't know, voted for Obama a third time. It's like, oh, cool, well, that's great. Because I mean, if you just hear it, you're like, oh, well, you really like him, but you can feel it.
For sure. Okay. So here's the next question. When Chris sits down with Rose's mother, Missy, she tells him that hypnotism causes heightened suggestibility. So that's an interesting choice of words. And we want to talk about how are we hypnotized by race in the Western world, and what does heightened suggestibility look like in our lives?
I love the word choice here. Heightened suggestibility. Because I believe that we're actually, all of us are constantly dealing with this heightened suggestibility. What narratives do we tell ourselves every single day? This is one of the reasons why we started the Story Geeks podcast, because those narratives are out there, and those narratives are repeated to us in story all the time. And until you start to break it down and go, what is that narrative actually telling me? Like what about that narrative? Because I think a lot of people, you could just go, oh yeah, I would assume that like being outside the city would be better than being inside the city. Okay, why would you assume that? What goes into that belief system? Why did you choose to say that? What made you say that? And what narratives have you been believing that would make you believe that? So when they say heightened suggestibility, what I love about it is I feel like it's so accurate to our experiences in the real world. And I can't speak to the African American experience in this particular case, or the Black American experience, whatever word you want to use. I can't speak to it, but as I watch this film, I'm like, what better words to describe what I perceive to be a narrative that has been driving on this one race of people, and other races of people too. But heightened suggestibility. When you wake up today, do you feel good about yourself or do you feel bad about yourself? When you leave your house, do you feel good about yourself or do you feel bad about yourself? When you run into people today and you get the narrative is repeated to you again and again. Like, we live in an era of heightened suggestibility. And it's just I think it's pretty sad, and I would like us to take the time to look at a movie like this and then break down those narratives. Why does that narrative exist? Tell me a different narrative. Show me a different narrative. I want to see a different narrative. I want to see how this works, how this plays itself out. And stories are some of the most powerful ways of doing that. And I just think that the way that he puts that phrase in there and the way that she uses it against him, I'm like, and we'll get into this more as we talk about the sunken place soon. Mm-hmm. But it's just it's just so artful the way he weaves that in.
Yeah.
I actually, I can't take credit for this interpretation. Screen Prism did a really interesting video on talking about this heightened suggestibility is actually the hypnotic effect of the media. Mm-hmm. They make a point early on of saying that Chris was hypnotized when he knew his mom was, that something was wrong, and instead of acting, he was sort of hypnotized by the television because he didn't want to acknowledge that it was real. And according to Screen Prism's sort of interpretation, when he gets hypnotized, it's supposed to be evocative of a lot of the conventional narratives, as you were pointing out, lulling audiences into a false sense of security, into a place of complacency. Like, that's one of the reasons why Rose turning out to be a villain is such a great thing, because audiences always have come to expect, because of the way a lot of narratives are sold to them, come to expect that olive branch from the white savior, from the one good white person that's going to solve racism in most movies. And so, like, and something that they point out too is that for the people who have gone through this process and have had their bodies hijacked, the thing that jolts them out is a flash of light, and so that. Again, this is according to Screen Prism's interpretation of the movie. That's what Jordan Peele is trying to do with this movie. This movie is that jolt of light to make audiences woke. I kind of dug that. I thought that was a pretty good interpretation.
I think it's awesome. I had one of my own, not necessarily narratives, but because I wasn't necessarily telling myself this, but I became more woke in this situation. So I had this scenario, and Daryl used to tease me about it because it actually happened when I was working with Daryl. I go for a run at night, right?
I was wondering if you were going to bring this up.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this up because it helped me understand it from another perspective that I did not understand it from before. So I go to run. It's late. It's like 9 o'clock at night or something like that. It's in the summer, and I used to live like in this sort of area. Okay, so it's a very nice area, but it's super white, like super white. Okay, so I'm going for my run, and I will say this, I used to jump the fence all the time because it was a gated community. I used to jump the fence. So I'm like, I don't want to take a key with me. It's taking too long. I'm going to jump the fence. So I jumped the fence, and I think I jumped the fence. I don't even remember.
Renegade for life.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm running down the street, like literally jogging, and the cop car rolls past. And it's not unusual, like whatever. And I see like a family, like 2 people with their dog, and then I see like some other people come by with their kids, right? And it's just like it's a super nice neighborhood.
It's like a neighborhood or whatever.
Nothing bad ever happens here, It's a suburban. So I'm running along. Cop car turns around, pulls over in front of me, and the officer's like, "Hey, you see anything weird?" And I'm like, I saw 2 people and a dog, and I saw some people and a kid.
And now I see a cop talking
to me. And I'm like, so yeah, no, I haven't
I
seen.
saw a cop do a U-turn without using their turn signal.
I saw a cop do a legal U-turn.
So
that looked pretty weird to me.
Yeah, so I'm like, no, I haven't seen anything weird. He's like, all right, just maybe keep your eyes out for anything weird. I'm like, all right. So I continue on. Dude goes around like he's like gone for a little while, pulls back up. This time he like pulls in front of me and like turns on the light, and I'm like, okay, what the hell? So he says to me, "You sure you haven't seen anybody suspicious?" I'm like, I feel like you've seen somebody suspicious or something. What's going on? And he goes, This is what he tells me. This is crazy town. He goes, we got a call about a suspicious person, male, about 6 foot, Hispanic, without his shirt on. And I go, this is what I'm thinking.
Like,
not illegal, not illegal, not illegal, right? It's okay for me to be without my shirt on. Which, by the way, I had a shirt. I had a shirt.
Oh, you don't know.
Well, see, this is the thing, though, right? Like,
dear.
this had never occurred to me before. And he came and then he said, like, if it fits your description, I was wearing a shirt. And so he's like, did you wipe your face? I'm like, I didn't wipe my face. I haven't taken my shirt off. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I haven't done anything. I live right up the street. What do you want me to do? Right? And he pulled back around. To his credit, he pulled back around and said, hey, we followed up on it. They did call the cops on you. They called the cops on me because now I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say if they called the cops on me because I was jumping the fence, that's a little weird, okay?
Okay.
But if they didn't see me jump the fence, I'm like, dude,
then
what in the world?
Yeah, then that's just straight up nosy snitching. People have way too much time on their hands.
Yes.
I know.
Well, okay, so the reason I even bring it up is just because, like, it was the first time I knew that racism existed. Of course, right? I mean, I grew up where I could see the fires from the '92, the Rodney King, the riots after that. What was the riot? Why am I not remembering what they were called? The LA riots.
LA riots,
92.
not Watts riots, but the LA
Yeah. I remember seeing that, so I know that racism existed. I knew there was a thing, but to have it occur in such a, but I was literally not doing anything. Like, that was the first time where it was like you're calling me guilty, and the only reason you're calling me guilty is because you thought that I was the wrong color. And I wasn't even the wrong color. I can't even, but it was an experience that was like, that's insane. I did not know that that's the level that I would experience in this area. And
imagine navigating that every day just because you have to. Like, it's because it's, if you don't know, you can kind of look through media. Black men are kind of like the vision of crime. Black women are supposed to be the vision of, like, sexual ownership. And it's been like that basically since slavery. That's how they've kind of, like, pushed it. So no matter where I go, it's like, what's he doing? And it's like, not doing anything.
What's Michael up to?
What's he up? Yeah. I think he's doing things. It's just like, now I'm just walking around. But because through movies, through TV, news, shows, whatever, it's been reinforced. So people that aren't even... people that wouldn't call themselves racist find themselves being racist or enacting racism because... heightened
suggestibility.
Yes.
Yep.
Now, speaking to her... what was her name? I can't remember the mother's name. Missy. All right, speaking of Missy, I think that her saying that was continuing his hypnosis. I think she started the hypnosis when she first clicked in the daytime.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Saying the heightened suggestibility through that thought in his mind to be like, oh, heightened suggestibility is possible.
Yeah.
Like those kind of things to kind of like, okay, now you're open to it. Now you're getting, now I'm really hypnotizing you.
Yeah.
Because, you know, even in the day, it's thrown away, but it's like, no, this is how she does things.
Right.
So that's how I saw it. I saw it as her second stop at getting him there.
Right.
So I just saw it as a very slow-moving web that she was weaving around him.
Absolutely.
To kind of get him ready to be hypnotized, ready to go in this sunken place. I will say one thing about the sunken place, or the way she said it, the second time she says sink is super scary.
Yes.
She's like, sink. He's like, wait. Sink. He's like, whoa.
It's like she's all demonic.
Especially in the theater. It's like...
yeah.
And just the way he sinks down into the chair is so well done. Ugh, it's terrifying.
And that's the first time they go sort of supernatural almost, you know. That's the first time that they really take you beyond
or
The
they
natural
go
experience.
supernatural, maybe some pseudoscience in
Yeah,
there, but
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
they kind of go into a different realm.
And you're not entirely sure as an audience if what we're seeing is actually happening, or if
Or if it's
he's
just
gonna
in his
wake
head.
up
Yeah.
from like a jump scare dream,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh no, he's just dreaming because something is off. Something,
Yeah.
they do have nefarious intentions in mind, but like this is the way his brain is interpreting it. But nope.
Nah, it's like, no, this is really happening. This is how it's going down, and you can't. It's weird. You're looking at him and you want to be able to help him, but he's down in the sunken place screaming, and he's looking up, and it gives you the vision from his perspective
Yeah.
to show you what he's experiencing. And then when you think of all the other people that have been living, who knows, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, just looking from that perspective and not being able to do anything, that's got to be sick.
This is, in terms of like tropes that I love, this is my jam. Like, I love possession stories and like body snatcher stories and things like that. So like when he sinks down into the chair and you see the
Kind of like TV.
The theater screen,
Yeah, it's
like
up
TV,
above
yeah.
him with the view of Missy. I was like, if this is real, then oh man, the rest of this movie is just right up my freaking alley.
Before we continue, we want to let you guys know all about the additional content you can find over at thestorygeeks.com. You'll find our latest YouTube videos, Patreon posts, and additional written content from our awesome blogger Ashley Pauls, who shares her own thoughts on all of our questions. It's all at thestorygeeks.com. And be sure to check out our past episodes, like the first 2 episodes of our Scary Movie Month series on A Quiet Place and The Meg. And then we also recently did a Make It Better episode on Justice League, which was super fun to talk through. So all of that, plus Ashley's blog posts, can be found at thestorygeeks.com.
Yeah, and then we'd also love if you would support us. There are 3 ways to do that. First is Patreon. You can support us monthly through our Patreon page. Patreon is a website that allows fans to support creators like us. When you support the show for as little as $2 a month, we show our thanks by giving you rewards like additional content. If you love what we do, we would really love it if you would become a patron. Please consider supporting us for as little as $2 a month, and we'll thank you by giving additional content back to you. You can find all of that over at patreon.com/thestorygeeks. The link is in the show notes. Also, want to let you know, on today's Patreon, we have an aftercast, which means we keep talking about this movie. So there's more content on Get Out with Megan and Michael coming up next. You can also purchase the Story Geeks merch. Show your family and friends that you're a super geek who loves digging deeper into science fiction, fantasy, and comic books, just like us. It's a great way to support the show. We've also got coffee mugs and everything else. And finally, if you're like me and you're a big theme park fan, check out modernmouseboutique.com. Modern Mouse Boutique sells geek fashion accessories. If you're watching on YouTube, you can actually see what they look like. And they're famous for having some of the highest quality mouse ears that you can buy. If you're planning a trip to a theme park, or if you're just a geek fan in general, make sure you check out modernmouseboutique.com. Our friends Angie and Josh are super creative and fantastic people. Use promo code STORYGEEKS, that's all one word, STORYGEEKS, no spaces. Use promo code STORYGEEKS and get 10% off your next order. Links to our Patreon page, our merch store, and Modern Mouse Boutique can all be found in the show notes or on our blog at thestorygeeks.com. Thanks for letting us interrupt. Now let's get back to the show.
Wait, let's talk about, is it real, is it not? What is the sunken place, and what's the significance of it? Is there a spiritual significance, a relational significance, a racial significance? What do you think?
If we wanted to put a little bit of a spiritual spin on it, I would say it's like your own personal purgatory or hell.
Mm-hmm.
I look at it as exactly how they describe it. It's a mental place of where your consciousness has been pushed down, so that somebody else can hop into the driver's seat, so to speak. You know, they describe it just like that in the movie. It's like
You'll be a passenger.
You're a passenger
Yeah.
in your own life now. In my mind, I was just like, oh yeah, it's just exactly how they describe it. I wasn't looking into any deeper meaning into
Yeah.
it or what it might symbolically represent, which I think is more of like the important question, because I think within the narrative of the film, it is just what they say it is. If you wanted to like peel back and go into more thematic elements, I think there's something more poignant there, but I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you what Jordan Peele intended for that particular place.
I see it as kind of like similar, like sort of like the furthest recesses, kind of like where I assume, because they don't really say this, but it's kind of like where we go when we're in REM sleep. So like the deepest
that.
part when you're like in the recesses of your mind. And I like how they showed it. Like he was almost like, you know, when they go like deep in the ocean, it's just completely dark.
Yeah.
Like the sun can't even like
Yeah.
get light down there. That's what it seemed like to me. So
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, you're kind of like lost in almost the negative space of your own thought. You feel alone because you know he feels alone, because we've already told that whole story about being a kid and
Yeah.
your mom was in an accident. So now you've seen him crying for like, I don't know, 2-3 minutes straight, and now he's down in essentially like the ocean, and he's looking up where you can see the ability to control yourself,
Yeah.
but you have no ways, no leverage, no ladder, no way to get back.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Extremely creepy.
And it's really visceral, because I feel like I've had dreams like that.
Yeah.
Like even just that visual of your entire line of sight shrinking down to the size of a small screen and blackness is all around you. Like I feel like I've had that dream. So just like the man running at me, that's another thing that I was already, that kind of hit me personally.
You were already
too,
like,
you
you're
know?
like, oh no, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like talking about it from like a color palette and like shot composition standpoint, it is very reminiscent of that scene where he's just sitting in front of the TV. Again, if we want to go back to the hypnotic effect that screens have on our lives, like that's it feels very familiar when it actually happens to him. Yeah.
I don't have a super different answer than you guys. It's just a little bit maybe nuanced here and there. So I think the first question I had is like, is our consciousness part of our physical body, or is it somehow connected to our soul or our spirit? And by the way, there's no answer to that. Like you have to just decide that for yourself. It's like consciousness exists in the mind exists in the body. It's all matter. Or there's some form of spiritual or there's some form of like spirit or soul that exists. I think for me that it's a little bit of both. Consciousness exists in spirit, soul, and body. Like there's some kind of connective tissue there that I don't know what it is. This is what I really loved about this part of the film. I love the fact that the story is indicating that we can live in the real world, or after we're subjected to heightened suggestibility, we can then slip into the sunken place. So the reason why I really like that is because the sunken space to me is definitely partially spiritual. The sunken place has to do with our perspective on our own identity. Who are we and what is our identity, right? And we start to follow someone's narrative. When we start to follow someone else's narrative about who we are and what value we are to the world, I think that's when we start to enter the sunken place. So, so like just to kind of examine the sunken place. What is true about the sunken place? You stop being yourself. You lose connection to your body. You're alone and isolated. Ultimately, you lose your identity. And I think that all of that is very deeply rooted in spirituality and a perspective on spirituality and a knowledge of the truth, because when we believe what the world wants us to believe, we're no longer believing the truth. And that's where the sunken place takes over. So almost like, to me, the sunken place is one of the more accurate like descriptions of hell that I've ever heard. Like that's where that goes. So the fact that he falls into it and it's about his identity and his identity being ripped from him, I think all of that really speaks to me from a spiritual perspective as well.
So it's just crazy.
Yes.
It's just frightening.
It's just crazy frightening. Yes.
All right. So our next question here, Dean reveals his spiritual perspective later in the film. He turns to Chris and he says, "What's your purpose, Chris? What's your purpose in life?" So the two questions for that are, first of all, what do you believe the purpose of life is? And then secondly, what significance does that have in the context of the film?
If we're going at it from a spiritual angle, I'm afraid I can't really give you guys a great answer. I'm at a very weird place spiritually. I'm pretty agnostic these days. But in terms of Dean asking him, what's your purpose, I think that ties less into what is spiritually your purpose or what do you find fulfillment doing. And I think that ties in more, again, to the commodification of, like, what purpose do you as a tool serve, or what purpose do you as somebody who should be subservient serve? Like that, I tie it more into that commodification subtext of the movie. If you want to put a spiritual spin on it, then like I guess more of I guess Chris could probably interpret it more through his work and like the melancholy perspective that he gives a lot of his art. But yeah, I see it more tied in with the family's true intentions.
Sure.
Yeah, that's good.
What do you guys think?
Me, myself, I took it as kind of like a dig at Chris. Like, what is your purpose? You're not doing anything but taking pictures.
It felt like the protective father question.
We know what best to do with your body than you do. That's kind of how I took it.
Yeah.
What are you like? What is your purpose in life?
Right.
You know, like we can do better with your bodies than you ever could. That's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
It's like what the brother says in terms of like the genetic question of like, hey, if you like really committed, like you could be at your physical peak, you would be a beast, is what he was saying. But like the way he went about saying that is like, you know, if you don't pussyfoot around, you could become a machine. And it is very much this like, I see your potential and I see what you could be doing with your God-given gifts, but you clearly don't see it that way because you're just hanging out right now.
Yeah, you're just taking pictures.
Yeah.
You know, like
You're not running laps with Grandpa right now.
No, Grandpa running.
Because of course he's living out his perceived, slighting or his glory days from when he lost the race.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What I found so interesting about that question, like, what's your purpose, Chris? What's your purpose in life? And I think you guys are right about Dean's perspective on Chris. Like, he sees him as something to be used. That's it, right? What I find so interesting, though, is that Dean's purpose in life is to overcome death to realize his supposed godhood. Right? That's what he's saying. He's saying, I'm worthy of being a god. The only thing that's preventing me from being as such is this body. So I'm going to take yours. Right? And that's his philosophy. That's his spiritual perspective.
That's the Armitage way.
It's the Armitage way. And boy, is it creepy.
I mean, yeah, they're looking for the key to immortality.
So I'll just speak from my personal perspective only. Because when I was looking at that, I'm thinking of he wants to be God.
Okay.
Right?
That's a really good interpretation
Yeah.
of it because he's meddling.
Exactly.
And he doesn't want to die. Like
Nope.
if he didn't want to necessarily become a god, then he would just be content with passing into the next life. But no, he's like, I'm taking ownership of my mortality.
So I asked myself the same questions he's asking Chris, right? I'm like, well, what is my purpose in life? Like, what is that about? And how does that drive what I do? Because that's the next question. Like, because he wants to be God. In order to do that, he has to take life. Because otherwise he's going to die, right? And so I always say this on the show, like, full disclosure, I'm a Christ follower. So I answer the question as one. But I feel like my purpose in life is to search for and love the truth, which means loving other people and then telling other people that they are loved by Jesus Christ. And I want to contrast that with what he's doing. because he's doing the exact opposite thing of that. And I just find that really fascinating because he and his family, his wife, are telling Chris, you're not loved. All you do is make mistakes. Go into the sunken place. Like literally he's telling him to go to hell. Go to a place where no love will be able to find you. And that all of the sins that you've committed are on you, dude, because you didn't save your mom and you knew you screwed up. So you're done. And I just think that that's like, it's just such a like demoralizing place for him to go and for him to be. So to me, that like, and I've said this a little bit already, but that sunken place is the narrative that we are not supposed to buy. The sunken place is the narrative that says you are nothing, you are not worthy, you are no good, you are worthless. And so for me personally, I think that hopefully my purpose in life is the exact opposite of what the Armitage family is trying to say their purpose is, which is to take over. And for me, it's more like, no, I think you need to know today that you are loved.
And that makes me wonder, because I was wondering this yesterday, I wonder if Rose is only picking people that have some sort of trauma because that's the doorway that they need to open to get that, to kind of unlock that suggestibility.
Yeah.
Because if you're someone that doesn't have like some serious trauma, I mean, not like, like I was picked on in 6th grade or something, but like some serious trauma, like I probably could have saved my mom, but I didn't, because I was like frozen in fear or whatever. To use that to unlock, is that something that they need?
Interesting.
Because if that's something that they need, then they can, lump all that on you. Like, look at everything you've done wrong. Right. It's all your fault, blah, blah, blah. Like, driving you deeper down the sunken place. And then they can kind of take over.
Easier to get that type of person into a state of heightened suggestibility.
Exactly. Yeah. And they have to get you there. They have to get you there. There's an indication that they have to get you to the sunken place before they can get the transfer, right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I just love that. I loved that he was bringing that into it because I'm like, wow, what he's saying is deeply meaningful to me spiritually. Not only just in the cultural components that he's brought in. It's deeper than that. That's crazy.
This last question is just kind of a fun one. So there's an alternate ending to the movie. And
this is the fun question?
This is the fun, well, sort of. I think you both said you haven't seen the alternate ending, but you know what it basically is. So basically, in the real cut of the movie, at the end, Rod shows up, and you see the lights and everything, and you're afraid that the police have come and they're going to blame Chris for everything and take him away and throw him in jail. And then it turns out to be Rod, and he's there to save his buddy.
I love when the door opens and it says TSA.
Yeah.
He opens it up. It says airport. Everybody was like,
yeah. Well, the alternate ending, it's not Rod that shows up. It is the police. Yeah. And they take Chris away and lock him up and blame him for everything that's happened.
Now, I'm normally the type of person that's like, oh, boo, studio interference, or, ooh, you shouldn't follow what the focus group says. But, like, I'm so glad that they changed this ending. Because I totally understand what the initial intent behind the original ending was. I totally get that. But at the same time, because it's also very much a conventional horror trope. We were talking about this a little bit before the show. It's definitely a conventional horror trope for the sole survivor or the hero to, in some way, shape, or form, get blamed for what's happened, and they either get incarcerated in a mental institution or they go to jail. That's a very common thing in the horror genre. But given the subtext of the entire movie, the very overt text in the entire movie, and just the world we freaking live in, when that cop car shows up, you can hear the entire audience deflate because they know what it means. Yeah. And they know the significance of what's about to happen, and they know how the scene looks. So the intent behind that original ending is that feeling, that sort of defeat, that
because they take the whole, because the whole crowd was just like, like the second we saw the lights, we were just like, because it doesn't look good,
right
just know
so that feeling of defeat is already felt. You know, we know what's ultimately going to happen to him in this moment. We know the best and worst case scenarios of what can happen to him in this moment if it really is the cops. And we feel that, we know it in our hearts. It's not hard to figure out. But then I love that they changed it, because like that it's not the ending that audiences need right now. Is the way I think that Jordan Peele put it.
Even though it is powerful, because I remember I saw him in an interview where he talked about it. Once you said it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember. But imagine stopping this, because the house was on fire, everything burned down. We assume they don't have any other family members. I mean, the people that were paying for it knew, but they didn't know how to do it.
Right.
So you stop this, but in stopping this and stopping the enslaving of other people that look just like you are then essentially enslaved for it.
Yeah.
And that's a very strong statement. It's also a very sad statement to walk out. Like my wife just recently, because we have a newborn, she hadn't seen Infinity War.
Oh,
and at the end of the Infinity War, when we watched it at home, she was like, what am I supposed to do with that? what am I supposed to do with it? She was like, when's the next one come out? I said, next year. She said, next year? So I can understand like the whole thing. It's just be like, you know, I mean, it's real life, so we understand, but dang. You know, because it's, you know, he did stop them, and they won't be able to do it again. You know, the whole house is burnt down, all that stuff. But nobody is going to believe the mind transfer story.
Right.
No, and even if they were, that tape that was playing, guess what? It's burned up.
Yep.
You know, anything. I mean,
all the evidence is gone now.
I mean, you could try to be like, well, the family was doing something weird downstairs with all that medical stuff, but
you can testify like, they had like, go look, and there's an operation happening. Like, clearly
there's a dude with no scalp.
Like, if he had not set the house on fire, then like there would be a couple bodies and a makeshift operating room.
Yeah.
So at the very least, you could be like, they were trying to do something to me.
So I forgot, because you would have the dead guy with no head on. So you would have been able to be like,
you
see?
You could like go with the slightly more believable story of like, they were trying to steal my eyes. To give to the blind guy.
Right.
I don't know why they had to take off the top of his head. I'm not a doctor.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
There is one real thing that he said. So when I watched the alternate ending, I hadn't seen it before, and it came with the commentary from Jordan Peele.
Yeah.
And this is what I felt like was so amazing. He goes, because I didn't understand this. One of the things I thought of was like, what did his mom dying have to do with any of this, right? Because it was a motive to get him to the sunken place, but then it kind of just dissipated. Well, get this, because this is crazy deep and crazy awesome. Jordan Peele said that there's a scene that happens in the alternate ending where Rod goes to visit him while he's in jail, and they're talking, and Chris says to Rod, who's trying to get him out of jail, you don't need to anymore. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, I need to get you. This is not fair. And Chris says to him, I'm finally free now. And I don't know the exact dialogue, because I was actually more listening to Jordan Peele's explanation. But the whole concept was, when he went back for Georgina, he was de facto choosing not to live into fear and was going back to save his mom. So even if you incarcerated him, you still could never take him back to the sunken place, because he had redeemed himself. And I was like, that's crazy.
He's no longer imprisoned by his guilt.
He's no longer imprisoned. Even if you put him in prison, he's still bigger than that. His identity is not in that. And I was like, that's crazy.
I'm still glad that they changed it, because like, you still get that redemption from him going back. And the whole social commentary aspect of it, that whole point still gets across the second you see those lights start flashing.
And then Rel is a perfect crowd pleaser. He's like,
he totally
when
is.
he was like, I'm T.S. mother, Consider this handle. It's just so. It's so perfect because we all have that one friend that it's like, it's Rod. This is how he is, and it was a perfect crowd pleaser moment.
It's such a brilliant thing to bring your audience down to such a dark place and then immediately lift them back up. It makes that victory feel all the more triumphant.
Yeah.
And it's one of I always appreciate any time any filmmaker can make an audience cheer. And it is especially in horror, because in horror it doesn't happen very often. But to hear an audience in a horror movie cheer for the hero at the end, it was so good. It was so good.
I think it's super crucial because, first of all, it leaves it on a fun note, which leaves you walking out of the theater satisfied and feeling like you had fun rather than you just watched a whole bunch of horrific, traumatizing stuff.
Yeah.
But when you end a movie on a dark note like that, it's divisive. And people pick one side or they don't. Like, that was horrible. That was awesome. And then if he would have done that in this case, it would have also been racially divisive. And so I feel like making this choice to end the movie on the up note rather than the dark note, he sidestepped that divisiveness.
Well, that was a lot of fun, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. Thanks for making the commute. You guys had to make the long commute. Daryl lives down the street. So
it's like I walked here.
I probably could have walked here faster than you drove here.
Probably so.
Absolutely.
In fact, I'm sure I could have.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for today's show. Special thanks to Megan Salinas and Michael Young for joining us today. And coming up next week on the Story Geeks podcast will be the next installment of our Scary Movie Month. So be sure and stick around for that, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on it.
And be sure to connect with us in the Story Geeks Facebook group. If you want to talk to us about these films and about the conversations that we're having, that's a great place to go. Let us know your thoughts on today's show and give us ideas for future episodes.
And if you enjoyed today's show or any of our other shows, please tell somebody about it. Share it with a friend, share it with a geek friend, share it with a non-geek friend, and links to all of the stuff that we've talked about are in the show notes. So go there, grab them, send them out to somebody.
Thanks for listening. As always, question everything in your favorite geek stories.
And always seek the truth.